All right, so welcome one and all to the first Interstice podcast, and we're going to cover a whole range of topics here, but I thought to start the series off, as this is the maiden voyage, that we would go with who is Davetrippin, and then perhaps later in this episode veer off into things more specifically to do with education and teaching in Japan and all that good stuff. So a little bit about me. Who is this guy who keeps showing up in front of the camera every so often? I'm a Canadian. I'm from West Coast Canada. I'm from Vancouver Island specifically. And that whole island culture, I think, really has permeated my whole life. There's a certain degree of being a little more laid back when you're there, being a little bit more country compared to other parts of Canada. And also, I think the sense of outdoors that I had there was a big part of why I so enjoy the idea of adventure, why I so enjoy being in other countries. Now, let's go right back to kind of the first memories that I had where I was growing up there, and that was on River Bottom Road. River Bottom Road is one of the most remote places. You're already remote when you're going to live on Vancouver Island, but River Bottom Road is, well, it's off the charts. It's off the charts. You're not going to find it. And it was a beautiful place to grow up. Although the funny thing is that I can remember the house not at all, but it's the surrounding places that I was that really left a mark on me. I do have memories dating back to times before this, but they're very vague and sparse and erratic. Like, I remember one time, and I think we had these water guns for ages, but they were like back-mounted, huge canisters that you could fill with like a hose. And I remember playing in a backyard of a different home with one of these cobweb-like places that you would be able to hang up your drying on if you'd done the laundry. And I remember that. And I remember, I think, my dad coming home to give us the gifts that were these squirt guns when I lived there. But the really concrete memories that I have are from when I lived on River Bottom Road in this totally remote place with basically forest all around us. That was to be a theme of my life, largely. Growing up was a lot of living near or in the wilderness, which was really good for kids. I'd really advocate for that now. If you can be more around nature, it's really, really good. There's so much to do to entertain yourself with nothing around you. It seems counterintuitive, but it's true. So one of my favorite memories from there, and this is hearkening back to the whole, I guess you would say, country lifestyle, was that my mom had a garden. She's always been into that in some form or another. It takes a lot of maintenance, so it's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but she would maintain a garden, and she had this huge leafy green vegetables and everything out there. And there was, of course, some sweet things. And this is one of the clearest memories that I have of all being young, was being out in this garden, and there were all these big rhubarb plants that had grown up. And you could take a stalk of this rhubarb, and we would bring out a bowl of white table sugar, and you would take a bite off of the end of this rhubarb, and then you would dunk it in the sugar bowl. And it was a one-way train to melting all the enamel on your teeth, but it's probably one of the most delicious things I've ever had in my entire life, easily. And I know it's that good because when I think back, this is probably me at about 5 years old or something like that, that I still clearly remember this. I remember the flavor of it, and I remember wanting more. And another part of being at this house, we had one of those little classic like dinner bells that you would ring when my mom would call us in. And something about that was always really exciting. I mean, we were, I guess you would say, like Pavlovian conditioned to the sound of this bell whenever we were going to have dinner. And you'd hear it go off, and no matter where you were playing in the woods surrounding the house, you would go back and mom would have dinner ready, and it was really cool. Another distinct memory I have of that time, and there's all kinds of detail with this one, is our next door neighbors. Our next door neighbors, at one point, it's weird how much this figures. It's like you separate your life into portions of time, right? And there was this time that was the neighbors had a pool, And it was full sized. I remember the construction companies coming in to like dig out the space for it and do the whole thing. And they were kind to us in the sense that they let us hang out there and use it anytime that we wanted, provided it was seasonal. And some of the best memories of my life, and really, really associating that kind of feeling you get when you're a kid and everything's so exciting. And I remember this pool being the coolest thing that I could possibly imagine, and enjoying it as much as I've enjoyed the best moments in my life. I mean, I didn't have a lot of experience. I had like, however many hundreds of days under my belt at that point. So I was going to be impressed easily, but a pool to someone who's not lived that long on this green earth was one of the most incredible things. And I remember walking from our house over to my dad's, sorry, not my dad's, over to our neighbor's. And I remember my dad's sandals on the gravel of the road as we went over. That sound is so clear in my head. And it was incredible. It was not to last, though, of course. The times, as always, were a-changin'. So after we lived there for some years, we would then move again to the house that we spent the majority of my childhood at, easily. And in fact, up until recently, within the last couple of years or so, the house that we moved to next is the house that my parents had occupied until, I don't know, time moves quickly, about 5 years ago now. And we were to move to this beautiful place on Vancouver Island that's known as Mill Bay. And one of the things I distinctly remember there that was so cool was Arbutus Trees. This is something, maybe you'll find them other places, but they're really, really kind of like, what would you call it? They're indicative of, they're sort of like trademark island tree. And what they have is this bark, and they're often by the coastline, and they have this papyrus-like bark that peels off as though you were going to write a scroll or something. And then underneath the skin of the tree, would you say, was incredibly smooth. We're talking like, oh man, it was like butter once this papyrus had fallen off of it. And the leaves were these kind of like more fern-like, beautiful, beautiful trees that you would find at the edge of the water there. I should mention now, as we're 7 minutes into this, that it's likely you're watching this on my channel now, but this is a podcast and it is available on Spotify and iTunes podcasts, where it was a big request I had to do the podcast, to speak at length, to really dig into topics and stuff that you can't necessarily do in a 6 or 8 minute video, which is usually what else is going up on the channel aside from these. And so if you want to be listening in transit, get hooked up over there on Spotify at the Interstice podcast, or on Apple Music, wherever you find Apple podcasts. And if you should listen to me there, I really do hope if you enjoy it that you leave a positive review, because that's how I'm going to get more exposure. So let's continue along at this new house that we moved to. It was, as I say, again, out in the middle of the woods, and an incredible place to grow up as a young child. Like, I got two older brothers, and they're at a distance from me, which was just enough for me to be incredibly irritating to them. But there were times that we were still able to hang out, and it wasn't utterly infuriating for them. And a lot of how we got to hang out and the sort of things that we were interested in at that time in our lives was dictated by the setting around us. So it was fields over here. It was a forest behind us. It was about 5 acres. Now, I don't know exactly what that is in square meters or anything, but suffice to say that it's generous in terms of having enough room to play on as a kid. I mean, it's more than enough. Like, each part of your house, I still have dreams that are so distinctive of each portion of where I lived. It's like, if I have a dream, I'll be like, oh, that was over in this part of the house in the property, and this was over in this part of the property. And our time was given over to some cool stuff like building forts. I loved, or I was more an onlooker in the course of this thing, again, not being quite old enough. when the guys got, for like their birthdays, they got hammers and nails and stuff. I was kind of tagging along to all this stuff, but I knew that it was cool, and I liked at least observing it. And the guys, they would build such elaborate forts. You had that sort of like Enter the Dragon stuff you see on Netflix, where they would build like obstacle course forts where you would be jumping from platform to platform, swinging from tree to tree. I don't even know now. When I think about it, it must have been hard to gather all the resources and wood that would have been required for us to make these things. It actually kind of boggles the mind when I think about it. But we did, and they made tons of forts, and there were all these evergreens, and I believe the term is coniferous. And those kind of trees have pine cones. And so, of course, you're a young kid, you're building a fort, you're going to have a pine cone fight. I think a good way to describe our childhood was as though Calvin and Hobbes had three main characters. That really, really describes it. Getting out there, going up and over the bridges, past the river, and with your stuffed animal companion. I actually had a stuffed animal when I was a kid. Really enjoyed that. His name was Dino the dinosaur. And I loved Dino. I had Dino for years and years and years. There's some funny, dark stories in there. In fact, I've talked a little bit in previous videos with Aiko about the time that Dino nearly died. But we were building forts, and the other thing that we had the option to do, or maybe more so my brothers, was motorbikes. That was huge. There was this big gravel pit that was behind our house, like a quarry. So you could go to the quarry that they dug out and you could motorbike all around there. And the guys got really, really good at it. And again, I was just young enough to miss these things. Like, my advice for all those aspiring parents out there, if you haven't done it already, something that's really going to make the enjoyment of your sibling relationships that much better, is if they are closer in age. My brothers were a little closer, and so, well, they were a lot closer actually, and it was easier for them to forge a connection because they're going through the same things, right? Now, had I been further away, and then I would have been clearly the younger brother, I think even then the relationship would be better. But because I was just close enough to want to do everything that they did, except at a much lower rate of success, then it made, until we were older, knowing each other when I was young, it was awkward. It was awkward because of that, and it was difficult. Maybe then I've gained something from that difficulty, some compassion perhaps. But that's my recommendation. And if I were to have kids, I would try and space them either far apart, so it's two different worlds and they're clearly like the bigger sister, bigger brother, or close together, so they're sharing similar experiences. Now, these motorbikes, they did such elaborate things with them. Like, if it wasn't riding in the quarry behind the house, they went to great lengths to design their own courses. We had these huge fields, and they would build up massive jumps and tracks and all kinds of crazy stuff, I imagine. And this was not just larger for the fact that I was younger. They were really elaborate courses. It was crazy how industrious both my brothers were at that time. It was really, really crazy to see. BMX was also huge, and so that was something they could kind of interchangeably do. But I do not begrudge them, or am jealous of the injuries that they had, because, man, there was a couple really bad ones. Like, one time my brother, classic, he was going down the driveway. I can't remember exactly how the bike slid out underneath him, except it went over on its side. And when it did, it trapped his leg underneath, and I don't think that he had shin guards on at that time, and it tore this like chunk of, it must have been something like a full, like, big rectangle that just opened up and exposed bone. And man, he took it well for whatever his age was at that time, but what rough injuries those guys got. I can't remember any broken bones, more tearing huge chunks of flesh off was sort of the order of the day when they were riding these motorbikes. So there was the motorbiking, there was the BMXing. I remember this is this is fond. It's sort of like this would belong in like awe or like wholesome on Reddit, where playing in the mud, being a true kid. I remember one time I was out there with my middle brother one day on the course, and it had rained so much. And our goal at that time was to simply get as muddy as we possibly could. And we're wondering, had no clue actually. You wonder what was going through our head. What's your mom going to think of you doing this? And we came up to the house, and when I opened the door there, it was like my mom had the biggest smile on her face that I've ever seen. She was so happy to see her boys being boys and out and playing and getting dirty. And I remember that so distinctly as a really, really positive memory. Something that we enjoyed as well there, and I have like memory after memory after memory, which is wonderful. And a big part of who I am now, I would say, was the Christmases, because if we got a white Christmas there, it was the most magical thing in the world. And there's all these details I can recall, like the way when you have your lights up, that if snow covers them, that then the snow begins to glow at each spot, that a light is on the chain of lights, and how peaceful that looked. We had this massive driveway that you would come up, and it would take you about 3 minutes to drive up. And so you would see this glow of the house in the distance as you drove up to it. And we were kind of at the peak of the hill at the back of the driveway. And how comforting a sight that would be during Christmas. And I remember I was in Cubs, and I would sell Christmas trees. And I remember decorating the Christmas tree was one of my favorite things that I ever did. The way that a room feels after you decorate one of these trees was incredible. And we had some great cats too. Like what I would do, I liked lying on my cats. They were crazy soft. And what you'd always find them doing is once you decorated the tree, there was all the lights, all the decorations, and heat generated by this huge glowing energy ball. And because it had so much heat and it went right down to the bottom of the tree and it was cozy under there with all the presents, the cats our cats, Aslan, named after the lion from, what is that series? I'm forgetting it now. Chronicles of Narnia. That was our cat. Would lie underneath the tree, and I would join the cat underneath the tree. And the tree seemed so huge when I was young. I love that. And it was always huge. Like, we were fond of having tons of people over to the house. That was a big thing for us to do. But then accompanying that was that a lot of the kids in the neighborhood, it's life. There's a lot of people having difficult times with their families. And if anybody was having a difficult time with their family, ours was this safe respite. You could always come over to our place. And I remember so often the friends of my brothers coming over, and I really, really liked them during that time when they would come over to the house and everybody would spend Christmas together, and the amount of cooking, all the baking that my mom would do, and the real, like, the embodiment of what Christmas truly should be, I felt at that house and for so many years. And it wasn't anything extravagant. It was all these smaller details. Not like, wealth is unavoidable in the sense that if you can buy your kid anything for Christmas, then you must have some money around. But it wasn't the extravagance. As I say, it was more the way that people gathered together, the way that it was a safe harbor for if anybody was having a difficult time in their life. It was something that I think so fondly back on. And now every Christmas, even if I spend it with one person now, it's an incredibly important holiday for me, and kind of checkpoint, milestone, reminder of the way that we should treat each other with openness and kindness and compassion and love and all that kind of stuff. It was here as well that I would have one of the hugest changes in my life, but I'll get on to that later because it has to do with me going from junior high school to high school. And I could talk a little bit about other things that we did, again, in this island setting that I so enjoyed, that I got exposure to, which was great. And one of which, if I wish I'd actually done this more, was paintball. again, led by the charge of my brothers. They were crazy into paintball, and we had the coolest place to go. It was so affordable. The fields were amazing. It was called Indian Road Paintball. It was on a reservation in a city. It's not really a city. It's called Duncan on Vancouver Island. I wonder to this day, maybe they're still up and running. It's hard to say. And Indian Road Paintball was an outdoor paintball course, and you would not believe the design of some of these courses, how awesome they were to play on. They had one course that was designed entirely for Storm the Castle. What were they? They were monster truck tires. We're talking like this is no exaggeration, real to life, massive monster truck tires. I even think bigger, like probably from massive manufacturing vehicles, or not manufacturing, but big commercial vehicles that they'd stacked up, created this big, huge castle around. And you would play Storm the Castle and get in there, and they had crazy deals on the amount of paintballs that you could buy for like $20. It included a lunch. And adjacent to that huge castle that they built out of these tires was what was known as the tournament field. All of this was all outdoor paintball, which I totally preference over indoor. Although that's enjoyable, but I think indoor basically occurs mostly because you don't have outdoor to use. People don't have that space, and we were lucky to have this. And the tournament field had so many interesting elements to it, whether it was bunkers that were designed from hardwood, or if it was like metal structures, you name it. There was so many interesting geographical pieces to the way that they designed these fields, and you could link the two, where you would have people storming from the tournament field, as it was called, over to the castle. And that was really cool. Actually, playing paintball, I have a mark that has stayed with me until this day on my hand here. It's obviously not going to really show up in the camera, but some fool, he was too like amped up on adrenaline, and he charged me when I was in a bunker. And I would have taken a mercy kill. Like I was scared. I was real scared. And he didn't say mercy, though. He went and shot me a point blank in my knuckle, and that sucks. Paintball, it's not actually all that harmful. It's mostly dependent on where you get hit. But something like a knuckle without gloves, that sucks, and it's left a scar to this day. All these things, though, like with the motorbikes, like with the paintball, it was just in the realm of my brothers being able to save and afford the sort of cool stuff that you would do, that you would need if you're going to play, if you were going to get an autococker, if you were going to get an auto mag. These were like the big premier. There was no electric paintball guns, really. I had a subscription to like a paintball magazine. I loved subscriptions when I was younger. To think subscriptions, paying for magazines now, how quaint. And they did, however, get all this stuff, and it was the coolest thing if my brothers got all this gear, and then occasionally when I would play with my friends, I would be able to borrow their stuff. And because I could borrow their stuff, I would show up to the field. Everybody's using crappy rental gear, and I'd rock up there with like an auto mag and all this wicked accoutrement and absolutely shred people, which was so much fun. Such a technical sport, paintball, in terms of the confidence that you need to make yourself better, because I think so much of what makes players horrible to begin with is that they're so afraid of being hit, they can't move strategically. And if you can't move strategically, then you're not going to position yourself where you can either flank or be confident to move into a dominant position or whatever else it is. But being afraid is such a detriment when you're out there. That once you got more confident, because I played so much with my brothers, if I ever went on school trips with, in the rare occasion that occurred, I would crush. I would pick off like, 4, 5, 6, 7 people in a single game, which if you play paintball and you know how difficult it can be to get people, because people do not want to get hit. They're chilling out. They're hiding for their dear life. That was really, really, really good. And so we continue with paintball. Once again, if you're watching this on my channel, it is available on Spotify and iTunes podcasts. And if you give it a positive review there, I really, really appreciate it. So we did the paintball thing for many years. In fact, my brothers got together to a point where they had a team and they competed a little bit, but life is changing so quickly at that time that it's always on to the next thing, on to the new thing. When I think of how into motorbikes they were, and how that changed, and then it became paintball, it became the next thing. There was always something new. To delve a little bit into what was interesting in this time growing up as well was the sort of like digital and media revolution that was occurring, has continued to occur over time, which is basically as a result of my dad being a first generation programmer. That when he went to university, the first computer that he ever saw, he said it filled an entire room. And he was fascinated by it, and he wanted to know, even at that time, though, obviously it was incredibly powerful. They never had anything like it before, pale in infinite comparison to what we have now. But because of that, we had a computer in our house before anybody else did. And we had a computer in the house when it was basically just a workstation. There was nothing that it was going to do other than program in the most basic software languages that it had. But of course, as this technology evolved, as soon as you could put a game on a computer, my dad had a game on a computer. And this, to bear in mind as well, this all predates the internet. When I was born 1985. And so at least for maybe the first 10 years of my life, it was like up and coming, and there was whispers of it, but I was a pre-internet baby, and I think that gave me a cool window into really appreciating when I was no longer a baby without internet, when I finally did get it in the house. And so we got to see this technology evolve. This, like, nothing could impact us more. Everything around me at this point in this room as I make this, my computer is a computer. There's a computer in my camera. There's a computer in my phone. It's like one of the most formative technologies in the world, obviously. And so it was so cool to map that progress because we were there from the start. And I remember all these cool details. Like, we had obviously screens with the computer before there was actually color. There was math games that we were playing that were like this burnt orange. We were playing the original King's Quests and Space Quests, where, if you've heard of these, you probably haven't, you would play these games where they were all text driven. And so you would walk up to something, and the only way to interact with it, which would be to actually write out what you were going to do. And you can imagine this would be a real pain in the ass for a kid growing up when you weren't yet able to read or write. And it was one of the reasons I think that we went on to read so quickly and write so quickly, is because if we were going to progress in King's Quest, then we needed to know how to write door. And I remember running up the stairs back and forth to ask my dad, how do you spell this? How do you spell this? It's really funny when I think about it now. And that obviously evolved at the point now, I'd say we're within less than half a decade away from photorealism and better, where it won't be a question of making something look real. It's going to be a question of making something look better than real stylistically, or however it is that people choose to design the games that they're working on. And I remember a conversation with my dad where I asked him, do you think one day, do you imagine that they could possibly have full 3D games? And him looking at me and saying, I think so. It could happen, Dave. It really could. And lo and behold, that was like the least of the accomplishments that you would see now that they're able to do, which is really amazing. I think games and stories are all really bound up in who I was growing up. A lot of that, again, it's related to my dad, where he read to me, and he read to me so many classics. He read to myself and my brothers. To each of us, he read out loud the whole Lord of the Rings. And talk about a vivid, incredible experience. Again, for those parents out there, if you got kids, read to them. It matters. And if I have kids one day, I know that I'll read to them. For now, I satisfy this sort of paternal instinct by reading to my brother's kids. They both have kids. So the big thing to come with the computers changing, one of the big ones obviously was color. I remember coming home one day and going from burnt orange, and there's my dad playing the first Sim City with like 12-bit color. And it was, again, isn't everything so related to scale and experience? Because when I saw that 12-bit color, it was like proof had been shown to me that anything was possible, because I really did believe so after seeing that. And there shortly after came the internet. And it started, of course, with this 56K, 28K modems, where these are long lost words in the halls of history now, but crazy slow. All the jokes about if you were gonna download like naughty pictures off of the internet, how you'd be like barely 30 minutes later and you'd have a side boob or something like that. It was all that kind of thing, and it was incredible. Though I remember, and I think we could always, it's always healthy to be reminded of this now, this sort of positive interconnection that occurs because of the internet, where the first experiences I had with online games, whether it was playing Doom or Quake or Red Alert, playing like the Command and Conquer games, and how incredible that was to me, that you would be speaking to somebody who was wherever else in the world, and the communication was instantaneous, and aside from the internet connection, that it cost you nothing at all. It was something very, very special. And I remember with each match that I played, I would always ask the person, I would always say, where are you from? Whether it was Finland or California, it didn't matter. I was really, really excited by the fact that I would be communicating with somebody that was so far away. And this kind of like evolution of technology, I guess that is another imprint where I talk about stories and media mattering to me. The evolution of technology, it really blew up, right? I mean, I think we can agree on that. Like, once you have the internet, once you're basically past the 80s, where, yeah, it was improving, but then just this explosion of electronics and everything else was absolutely incredible. To go from film to digital photography and all this kind of stuff was so cool. And then to see, like, as time went on, then we moved from this 28K, we moved to the broadband, and then you could like download a whole movie in, under an hour or something like that, which was absolutely incredible. I was lucky, really lucky, I think, that I had a dad who was so into movies, because I'm a huge movie buff, and he always took me to them. And I loved seeing, when you think about how long the industry has been around, it's not that long. It really isn't. What is it? It's like 2 lifetimes or something. I don't know how old Hollywood is, except it's not that old. And sort of like the film incarnation of what it is that we enjoy now, let alone color film, is this other shorter spectrum of time that has existed. I loved going to the theaters when I was younger, and I remember calling in to ask when the movie times were, and I had a good agreement with the Faja. He would always say, I'll buy the popcorn, of course, but then it's your duty. If it runs out, you get a free refill. So I would go back and I would refill the popcorn. And I loved seeing, and I have loved seeing, continue to do so, the evolution of that art. He had a great grounding in it because he was a big movie buff, and one of the first, hope he doesn't get in trouble for it now, one of the first VHS pirators had like the 2 setups. For anybody who knows what I'm talking about when I say VHS, so these video cassettes, and then you would have one recording onto the other. And I got exposed. I'm so grateful to, as a kind of foundation for my appreciation of film, the sort of stuff that was truly older now, truly older. And how good it still was, even though they don't have the incredible effects that you would see in something like Endgame now, or whatever else that it is you're going to watch, which is so incredible because of the computer graphics, the avatars, and whatever else. Like, I have so many really strong favorites. The one that I always cite, which is crazy because it has like Leslie Nielsen in it. And it's this sci-fi called The Forbidden Planet, which is the home of the iconic character Robbie the Robot. Classic sci-fi, where I'm sure at the time was like groundbreaking effects, but you watch it now and you probably laughed. But the storyline was so good, so engaging that you'd watch it now. I'd watch it now with somebody, and I bet we would really, really enjoy it. And with that base and checking out all those older movies because of him as time went on, and I've continued to watch, I've been absolutely blown away by the evolution of that technology along with everything else that we have. It's interesting to me to see how the landscape changes, though, where I recently watched The Joker, and it's exceptional. And to me, it's funny because it's criticized, it's received criticism, it's received a lot of praise as well, but it's criticized for being this incredibly evil and hyper dark depiction of someone's life, where it makes me wonder with the people reviewing these movies, have you been watching movies? Like, do you know how, I mean, this is dark, but to me it was more artistic than it was particularly focusing on the depravity of this person. It was, have you ever seen Requiem for a Dream? Watch Requiem for a Dream if you want to see a truly dark movie, although that's exceptional. I enjoyed it in a similar way, although Requiem for a Dream, I would say, is much darker. Oh, people were so sensitive, it seemed, to the sadness that you find in that movie, which was really odd to me because I thought there are so many movies that are as, if not more, sad than this. And I think a lot of the criticism that's leveled at it too is a sort of modern criticism where the people who could make negative connections with it and appoint the Joker as their mascot for whatever negative cause, it's only because they exist now, where the Joker's story, it's a guy who's lonely and feels put upon by society. And I think that's like the everyman feeling. I mean, there's a select few of us who've lived such a rosy life that we never feel lonely, that we never feel manipulated, that we never feel forgotten. But I would say that's an exclusive small group of people. That movie to me was for everyone, because we've all felt like that. We've all felt ignored. We've all felt like nothing would go right for us. And I think there was some incredible common ground that you could find there. If you don't, it's bizarre to me that people would feel so threatened by sadness, is like that sadness is so taboo. Obviously, without going into any spoilers now about what specifically happens in it, but of course there's darker elements, but at its core, it could be said that it's a story about a very sad person, a very sad, abused person. And if we haven't all felt like that at some point, then I think you're missing a part of the human experience. So, movies, the internet, paintball, motorcycles, ridiculous. I had two incidences, one where I went flying over a fence because I popped the clutch too fast, the other where I drove one of my brother's motorbikes down this huge driveway and I didn't change gears, and so I nearly burnt out the engine like a fool. But other things, of course, we're not just talking technology. I love music in the 90s. I think we can agree it's not only with nostalgia that people look back and they think that music in the 90s was very good. It was very good. Although I like how it contributed to music informs culture and culture informs music. It's sort of a cyclical thing. But one of the funny things that I always found came out of that was there was a lot of very popular, aggressive techno back then. So you had like the Crystal Method, Chemical Brothers, Prodigy, and there was no better music in the world than buying a cheap car and spending practically triple or double the cost on the sound system than you would put into the car. And that was really cool. I enjoyed that. Again, not the guy who actually had the money to put the subs and the tweeters and the woofs all in there, but I was along for the ride. And I remember listening to Prodigy in a couple of like my friends and my brother's vehicles, and it was awesome. It was so good. That album, I believe it's Fat of the Land. Fat of the Land was such an awesome album. Chemical Brothers, so good. The Crystal Method, so good. The car culture that arose if you had a Honda Civic and you spent all this money on the sound system. What a great culture that was at that time. Now, I had some weird things when I think of my childhood that are kind of funny, some harmless, some funny, some a little more dangerous than others. One of which was I thought this was cool. I think this is cool now because I have not yet met another person on this planet who has experienced this this similar thing to me, which was recurrent dreams. And I'm not talking about a dream that repeats itself. I'm talking about a dream that has an ongoing narrative where I would wake up, and then when I would go to bed at night, I would start off the dream where I had left off when I woke up, and it would be repeated characters. And I don't know, like I felt like I had friends and stuff, so it wasn't like a desire to create like an alternative companionship for the fact that it was lacking, but I did have this. And the main character was Dodd, and I can never remember the face or anything. I can only sort of remember the proportions. And then there was three of them. The other one was Firecracker. He was a little tiny guy, sort of cartoonish, I think. Can't remember the third one, but it was so cool because I would wake up, I would go back to bed, and then they would be waiting for me there. And they'd be like, what took you so long? We got to go do this, that, and the other thing. And I have not yet, as I say to this day, ever met someone who's had recurrent dreams with the same characters where you continue the storyline as you go. I also had, when I was this young, at this house, I had for a period of time, I empathize with people who experience night terrors, because this is something that I had really, really bad when I was that age. And I actually had a card at school one day where they were asking you, like, how do you feel? Like, what's your happiest time of the day? And you got to draw a face for like each hour of the day or something like that. And I remember drawing on this thing, and in the morning it was super happy, and you can see the face and its happiness degrade over the day, because the closer I got to when I had to go to sleep again, the more horrible I felt. And so it was really dark, like waking up screaming. And it's so, when I think about it now, kind of existential, the thing that was bothering me at that time. Crazy to think, like, why was this bothering a kid who's like 8 years old? I feel that sort of sensation of you wish you could go back and be like, it's all right, man, to your younger self. But I had this, it was always the same. It was always the same again. This is recurrent, but it was repeating as opposed to a narrative that continued, where I'd imagine this flat field. When I say that, I mean like a graph, and on this graph were dots, like a black, like a polka dot would be a dot. You had dots, and each one of the dots represented an individual in my family. And they would start to move. And as soon as they started to move, it was like my dread and terror was directly proportional to how they progressed in a flat horizontal line across this graph. And soon ones would fall further behind the others, and other lines would progress ahead. And what I knew, without having it obviously embodied so clearly, was that each one of these dots represented a member of my family. And the terror, the horror, was that they would be left behind. And one of the dots, as it fell behind the other ones as they progressed across the graph, was like they were failing in life, and that no one cared about them, and they wouldn't receive any help. And I woke so many times, drenched in sweat. It was horrific. And I think, like I say, that was a 10-year-old kid or whatever it was experiencing that, where, whew, maybe I understand why the kids that I teach at the elementary school can be so dark sometimes. Because if this was going on in my head, and grade 6s in elementary school are 12 years old, I suppose I was experiencing similarly dark things at that time. When I look at some of these kids and they seem so jaded, and I think there's enough time in your life to be sad and cynical. Don't pick up the habit too soon. That was some weirdness when I was younger. And in addition to that, I would pass out. Thank God that passed away fairly quickly, where I remember one time distinctly, it was in elementary school, at one of my earliest elementary schools. And we were designing these blocks of many geometrical shapes. And we were making art, essentially. Kids making art with geometrical shapes. And I went to look at one of the other students' designs, and I went over it, and I said, that's really cool. And the next thing I remember was me, white as a sheet, lightheaded, sweating, was somebody holding their hand to my head and me wondering what the hell had happened. And as I had looked over top of this design and said that, I had passed out over top of it. And it just so happened that the centerpiece to this whole thing that the kid had created was this huge triangular spike, and it had driven itself into my forehead. But now it's okay. And I went in and I got like the, whatever it is, I don't know, CRT scans. I'm going to sound like a fool. I'm not sure. But I got the CRT scan, and then those eventually faded. So thankfully, I have not continued to experience those in my life. Do you know that there's a type of person, I can't remember the condition. They've actually made a movie about it fairly recently. There's a condition that exists where passing out is caused by an upswell of emotion, usually good. What a prison to be trapped in for your life, where any good feeling makes you pass out. So your wife did something nice for you, pass out. You're thinking about enjoying your favorite movie later in the evening, pass out. Count your blessings. That's one of the, I can't imagine, like I say, what a prison. What an absolute prison to have as a part of your life. So for me to have a few fainting spells, so to speak, when I was younger, not so bad. Not so bad in the grand scheme of what could occur. Now, another thing, there's a lot. I'm so appreciative of the stuff, like all the cool experiences I had as a kid. And like I say, these are not necessarily based on decadence. It's more the effort to get me out and do unique things. My dad is a real adventurer, and he's a mountaineer, and he's traversed several mountain passes and all this crazy stuff. And when I was younger, one of the things that he introduced myself and my brothers to, again, when we were about 10 years old, is there is this national park in British Columbia, the province from which I am from. And it's called Bowron Lakes. And it's a series of 7 lakes. And it takes, if you do a lake a day, it takes approximately 7 days to traverse this whole park. And normal people would go when it was usually like warm. You would go in like spring or something like that. But my dad hates crowds. So when he would take us, or take us individually, he would take us usually in September, October. And for the reason of that there would be so few people in the park, and it was just about to shut down, in fact. And I remember, these are funny memories when you think of your awareness and how things compute in your head when you're that young, was Europeans to me. I thought Europeans were like a specific ethnic group, like Caucasian or Black or Latino or whatever else, right? I thought it was an ethnic group, and he'd be like, there's a European. And I thought of like Peanuts too. I don't know what it was, but yeah, we would see them and he'd be like, there's a European. And I was like, oh, interesting. They look similar to us. But then we'd meet other Europeans that were darker skinned. I'd be like, I don't get it. I don't get this whole ethnic thing. And this Bowron Lakes trip is easily one of the most beautiful things I've seen in my entire life. This is going from beautiful evergreen forests that are right next to you, and in the same view, rising up to snow-peaked mountains. And we're talking aqua blue, perfect pristine water from all shades of green, effervescent, sparkling in the sun. It's one of the most gorgeous, incredible things I've ever done in the outdoors in my life. Wild experiences of massive rain and having to like tarp up, survive all that with your rain gear as you paddle all day, to having bears really near our camp. You always had to set your stuff set aside, usually in these like up a thing or in a container, so you didn't have to worry about bears. The cold, the fact that we were doing this in October, but the crispness that comes with that sort of early winter, the onset of winter, late fall, early fall, where the light gets really golden much sooner in the day. A singular experience, something, again, if I had kids, I would love to give them exposure to that kind of thing. And because there was a lack of light pollution when we were out on this trip, the stars above you, it's when you live in a place where you have more light pollution and you don't get exposure to that, you do not realize what is possible, what you can see above you if you go on these kind of trips. I burned into my mind. And memories as well. My dad, he's quite loves, like I say, loves to read. He read to us. I remember poems that he would teach me when I was out there. And I think I'll finish on a verse from that as we finish out the first episode of the Interstice podcast, which is, "Were you ever out in the great alone when the moon was awful clear, and the icy mountains hemmed you in with a silence you most could hear, with only the cry of the tinder wolf as you camp there in the cold, a half-dead thing in a stark dead world, clean mad for the muck called gold." He taught that to me in one day when I was 10 years old, and it has stuck with me for the rest of my life. All right, thanks very much for watching. I appreciate it. I hope to see you guys either in the comments or leaving a positive review if you enjoyed it on iTunes podcasts or Spotify. And I'll be back, and we will continue the story of getting to know Davetrippin as we set the stage for the Interstice podcast in the many months and uploads to come. Thanks for listening, and thanks for watching.